can block that with AdBlock Plus. Of course, you can get rid of annoying ads. I'll go on in a second to talk about why I think that's the main reason that most people initially download an ad blocker. But suffice it to say that is the main thing people do it for. But the most important thing is you can do whatever you want with an ad blocker. It's really more of a web customizer. And the name is a bit unfortunate because it just doesn't give you the capability to block ads. Rather, it gives you the capability to see the internet the way that you want to see it. And that's why it's in line, as Alex said, with Title 66. Taking another step back, why would you block ads? So this was a study done by Adobe in 2013, and what they found was the majority of users, especially in Germany, US, UK, and Australia, find online ads annoying. Usually what that means is that it intrudes upon their experience. Basically, people go to websites to read content, to watch content, and when you intrude upon that viewing with an advertisement, then it can be very annoying. 2 slides ahead, sorry. Oh, okay, brilliant. So if so many people are being annoyed by online ads, the question is, what do they do? So they have a couple choices. They can either accept them, they can avoid them, they can block them, or they can pay. And what most people have done, next slide please, is option 3. They've decided they're going to download a free ad blocker. These numbers are based upon a report last year by PageFair and Adobe. They estimated that 144 million internet users have some sort of ad blocker installed upon the browser. So that's quite a few. Next slide, please. With this, I alluded earlier to our acceptable ads initiative, but let me take you back a few steps to tell you why we have an acceptable ads initiative. We are the original ad blockers, I said at the beginning, and in 2006, Vladimir Pallant, our co-founder, rewrote the code for ad blocker and changed it with an eye toward usability. Vladimir was blocking everything at that point. From 2006 to 2011, he blocked every ad online that you could find. In 2011, he saw that blocking was potentially endangering the free internet as we know it, because the free internet that you and I enjoy every day, whether you block ads or whether you don't, is basically fueled by ad money. So we thought, well, what can we change? What can we do differently? So in 2011, he started to come up with some ideas about what could be a possibly acceptable ad. So the first thing he did is he asked our users in a little pop-up survey, he said, would you be okay with ads if they weren't so intrusive? 76% of our users said yes, we'd be fine with that, that would be okay. So the next question is, well, what is acceptable? And to find that answer, Vladimir and our co-founder Tilfida went to our users again, and in a series of forum discussions, they asked them, what would be to you an acceptable ad? From those discussions, they developed criteria for better ads. And we can probably go into what those criteria are later, but suffice it to say, they all have one common thing and that is that ads can't intrude upon your experience. So what we did is we set up this system to where advertisers on a one-time basis can come to us, and they can ask to have their ads whitelisted, and then after that, their ads can appear by default. The idea behind this is a compromise. The idea is that at some point we would like to move to the next level of ad blocking, and we realize that 100% absolute black and white ad blocking is not the future, because ads have a place in the future of the internet. So if you could please go on. Now you may be asking about users. Users are informed about this from the moment that they download the software. The screen you see up there is actually the screen that they see when they download it. If they don't want to see acceptable ads, they can still block all the ads. And we provide a forum where users can see every ad that's been whitelisted, comment upon that, and complain about that if they think that it violates the criteria. So this is sort of our vision for better ads. And we think we stumbled upon something good, because up to this point, we have quite a few people who are partaking in the Acceptable Ads initiative from the advertiser and the publisher side. And then on the other side, we have a very low opt-out rate from users. So it seems that maybe we stumbled upon, through lots of trial and error, we had a lot of other solutions that we tried out there, a way to make ads acceptable for even a very finicky, a very particular ad block user. And the conclusion I wanted to come to, going back to the fact that ad blocking and advertising is in a transitional period, is basically that ad blocking is not going away. The same PageFair study to which I alluded earlier said that 41% of 18 to 29-year-olds claim to use some sort of ad blocker. There's no reason to think that, this being the millennial generation using ad blockers, there's no reason to think that the generation following them is going to use fewer ad blockers or install fewer customization tools to their browsers. So what we have to do in this space that we found ourselves in this transitional period, is we have to find a compromise that fits for all parties. And we never have claimed that our acceptable ads policy is Shangri-La. We haven't stumbled upon the perfection yet. But we do think that we stumbled upon something that's worked and that's pushing this debate forward, and we're happy that the debate is being pushed forward. So with that, that concludes my remarks. I believe I'm on time, and I will pass it back to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks for maintaining the 10-minute schedule. We do have a little bit longer because we're missing one panelist, so if you do overrun a little bit, it's not too much of a problem. So next we're going to go to Plaise from Criteo. He's going to be representing the opinion of publishers and how ad blocking impacts their industry. Thanks very much, Plaise.
Indeed, so my name is Plaise Vignon, and that's not my presentation. I'm a product manager for Criteo. I'm an engineer by training. Criteo is a tech company. You could characterize it this way. So,
Jesus was on the same one as Mark.
Yeah. It should say Criteo.
Yeah.
That's the title.
Okay, we just sorted out the presentation here. Thanks very much.
Good. So I was saying I'm a PM with Criteo. Criteo is a technology company working in the ad space. We are not a publisher. We don't operate websites except Criteo.com, which you would probably not enjoy. I'm an engineer in that organization, product manager, and I just want to tell you a little bit why Criteo is relevant to that conversation. Criteo is not a publisher, as I said, but we partner with 10,000 publishers. The way Criteo works, you might have had that experience before. We do retargeting, which means the experience is when a user goes to a retailer website typically and sees a couple of products, and then we can find that user again somewhere on a publisher website and then show relevant ads to that particular user to try and drive conversions. So it means we purchase advertising on publisher websites, and last year, 2014, we reported we purchased more than 400 million euros worth of advertising. Our banners don't have videos, don't have sound. They are typical HTML5 banners. On the next slide, I would like to tell a little bit on privacy at Criteo. Retargeting has been a long focus on privacy advocates such as you, Alexander. And we obviously we use third-party cookies to match your visit to an advertiser and your visit to a publisher. We don't use, however, personally identifying information like email, IP, or genders. We collect information around the way you interact with an advertiser or with a publisher, the way you interact with Criteo ads, and obviously we collect information on whether you opt out of Criteo. And then we use that data to decide whether or not it's worth purchasing ad space to show an ad to that particular user, and at which price we are ready to purchase that space. We also use that data to decide which products are relevant to show to a particular user. We have had an information notice since 2009, and now we implement the opt-out notice as required by law, and I think a little bit above that. As I'm not a lawyer, I wouldn't be able to go into details. I wanted to say a word about the role ads have in internet. Even though I don't represent IAB, I do And that's, you can imagine it's quite a big number, and it's hard to wrap your brain around it, basically. So the only way I found efficient to understand that number is to translate it into an ARPU. So if you were to translate that into revenue per user generated by advertising, for Europe you find something between 60 and 70 euro per year generated by advertising. Now the question you might have is, so ads are basically a critical source of finance for the internet, but the question you might have is, how do ad blockers play into all that, right? And our understanding is that blockers are a symptom mostly of user rejections of annoying and intrusive ads, and that was quite clear, I think, in the way I presented ad blocking. So in a way, ad blocking is a useful signal. You don't want to show too many ads to a user that doesn't want to see any of them, but ad blocking rates for some publishers right now, which are above 50 or 70%, are also creating a revenue issue for small websites. One thing I wanted to note is ad blockers have this kind of double role of enabling privacy and blocking ads. And so there is a kind of design limitation of the, due to the way they were born, of where does the privacy tool start and where does the ad blocking begin. The two missions are not always clearly separated. That's something from an ad side perspective we're having trouble understanding. Another thing that you can do well with current ad blocker technology is decide which ads are okay for you. We'll see in the next slide that users react very differently to different ads, and current ad blockers don't allow you to kind of tune that. And the last limitation we can see from an ad side perspective on ad blocker is the way the governance of ad blocking is it's open source, but it's also not always very transparent in terms of what's an acceptable ad, what goes into the list, who maintains the list. It's not something that we can really understand very well. On the next slide, I have a couple of numbers. I'm using the same report you're using, Ben, from Adobe. Unfortunately, it's not very readable here. But the report breaks down ad acceptability per type. And it's this report from Adobe and feedback from the industry and from user make it very clear that ad blocking is an ad-driven phenomenon. It's a rejection of ads, and it's a rejection of a limited number of ad formats. And so, as an industry, there is an opportunity for us to self-regulate and try to solve this. We could self-regulate around responsible advertising practices. We've done that for user choices and data collection. We could obviously do that for format classification. We could provide more transparency around governance of ad blocking or ads, around financial impact of ad blocking, etc. And obviously we could provide more granular control over formats. Obviously, it would be a very nice direction to work together on. And I guess this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Blaise. It was very interesting. Now, from the news that we've had over the past couple of months, there's been a new player in the scene called Shine Technologies. They're based in Israel. And as I stated earlier on in the introduction, they're looking at deploying their ad blocking technology at the network level for mobile operators by the end of this year. So I'm going to hand you over now to Roi Carthy from Shine Technologies to give his arguments on ad blocking and what they're going to be doing in this space. Thank you, Roi.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. For those of you interested, the presentation is available online. I tweeted it a little earlier. My Twitter handle is Roi, R-O-I. So if you go to twitter.com/Roi, it's there. Feel free to share and download and such. So my name is Roi Carthy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Shine. We are based in Israel. Next slide, please. So let me give you a quick history about Shine because it's rather important to the discussion. Shine was founded nearly 4 years ago as an antivirus company. The guys set out to reinvent the antivirus for mobile. There were new threats, new devices, new methodologies that had to be developed, and that's how the company was founded. And actually, we built an antivirus product and we started rolling it out. The background of the company, the expertise is white hat hacking and cybersecurity. That's really where we come from. We're not an ad blocking company per se, meaning we didn't come from that area. No from advertising or from telecom. We sort of found ourselves here. Next slide, please. What we discovered was interestingly enough that ad tech is a lot more impactful on users than malware, than viruses, which is maybe a little surprising at first. But when we began talking with carriers simply about distribution of our antivirus product, they asked us to look at their traffic, their data, their network. And what we actually naively discovered is that from the user perspective, the most abusive form of malware is actually adware. Next slide, please. Ad tech is abusive, simple as that. The best minds of Silicon Valley are developing ad tech. They can be just as well be working for the NSA. The technologies, the methodologies, the techniques are identical. If you are developing modern day ad tech, you could be developing technologies for spy agencies. It's as simple as that. There's, it's no surprise that these technologies are called targeting, right? That's as charming a term as profiling. There's a reason for that. This technology does that, and there's no even desire to hide it. It's called targeting. And ad tech is abusive, as we discovered, as Sean discovered, to the user experience, and I'll describe this in a moment, and as well as to the network itself, to the carrier, to its infrastructure. I'll describe these in a moment. Next slide, please. That discovery in our life, from malware to adware, caused us to rethink how we view the world in terms of the user experience. And what we believe, simple as it sounds, is that consumers have an unalienable right to block ads. Okay? The reasons for it we'll discuss, and this panel has mentioned a few, but that's what we believe. Users, consumers, have this right. Next slide. Ad tech, of course, mostly, and I say mostly, doesn't agree. There's a phrase I like, which is adware is malware with a legal team. If you think that's incorrect, you should try battling them. I think our friends here at IO have discovered that they have legal teams on the other side. Ad tech generally doesn't agree with this. There are a few voices that do say that maybe a self-reflection is necessary, but mostly the ad tech industry does not believe that consumers really have a right to block ads. Next slide, please. So I described that ad tech is abusive to the user experience and to the network. So here's a couple examples that I can share with you. So let's describe the usage of data, right? So consumers, everybody, if you have a cell phone and a smartphone, you get talk time and you get data. Ad tech uses data in ways that consumers have no idea and no ability to discover. Okay, I can tell you this because it required a team of cybersecurity experts to figure this out. Okay, and what we discovered is, for example, for an average game, which I won't name, but it has pigs flying and birds that are not very happy about it. When you kill the data, right, the transfer, the game actually, or when the data, just the ads, the bandwidth, the data usage drops from 5 megabyte to 50K. That's an extraordinary amount of data used by someone that the consumer is completely unaware that is using. Now, some would say, well, that it supports advertising. Well, okay, so let's use an analogy. If I'm driving on a toll road, does gas just disappear out of my gas tank, and then at the end of it say, well, use the road, and we decided that's a proper analogy. In the same respect, ad tech is extremely abusive to the battery life. Okay. Now, both of these examples you'll find some research recently on the internet. We've seen actually data usage anywhere from 15 to 20% to 50% of data of your data plan taken by ad tech. That depends on your size of the data plan and geographies, but it's rather substantial. Even 5% is ceiling. I mean, think of somebody taking 5 cents off of your salary. Battery life as well. We've seen it in the range of 10% and above. And of course, you have no idea, and you complain that the phone you just bought for so much money is not working, and they should develop better technology. That's not Apple's or Google's fault at this, or Samsung's. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we jump, the network abuse, the carriers. Now, people don't seem to be very empathetic to their cause because they're big companies, they make a bunch of money. However, if you invested significant amount of money in infrastructure, in frequency, billions of dollars, and some other party abuses it, and it makes you spend more money to expand it and support it, you would have a different opinion about abuse. Carriers are paying an extraordinary fee to allow ad tech to make money. They're not particularly happy about it, but I will actually describe what we have found that is motivating them in a moment. So, thanks for going back. So why is desktop ad blocking hockey sticking, right? Ben here mentioned that it is growing, and indeed it has, and they've been doing a fantastic job of bringing ad blocking to the desktop. So first of all, there's this concept of, well, content is free, so you have to support it with advertising, hence consumers are agreeing to this deal. Well, this deal is being violated. All of us here in this room are surfing the internet. We know how abusive and how many advertisements appear in a standard surfing session. Ad tech has gone unchecked. Plaise said that self-regulation is an option. I'll mention this in a moment. And most importantly, consumers don't have a say. So they're resorting to applying ad blocking. And again, this is specifically ad blocking on desktops. Next slide, please. The factors that are propelling ad blocking, there's a few that we believe are noteworthy. First of all, as I said, the volume of the ads and their intrusive behavior. The distribution. Firefox and Chrome. So Chrome is actually the biggest distributor of desktop ad blocking. The only reason Google even allows this is not because they're particularly nice about it, but because they have to match Chrome abilities with Firefox. So actually we can thank Mozilla for this, okay? But that's the only reason. And demographics, as Alex, I believe you mentioned, or I'm not sure if it was Ben, millennials, and just in general, people are slightly more savvy, and if they're aware of a way to do it easily and that it's available, they may do it. We're seeing numbers across Europe, sometimes as much as 28% of the population using ad blocking. In other demographics, it's even 50%. So this is not a trivial issue. Next slide, please. Now, why are consumers blocking? I mean, they're not really, to say that they're blocking ads for the sake of blocking is not really true, right? They're blocking ads because ads are behaving in a manner that they find unacceptable. This isn't an arbitrary ad. Nobody just flips on, downloads, and installs an ad blocker. It happens because there's a very conscious dissatisfaction with the way browsing and apps work right now with advertising. And what's interesting is that this past year, when ad blocking is sort of the issue has gone up in the press, we've seen the advertising industry react. The advertisers and the publishers, and Plaise, of course, is representing the publishers. We're not seeing very much self-reflection about this. So to say that this industry can self-regulate itself is, I apologize, but a joke. This is an industry that is based on abuse. The abuse that happens just within ad tech itself is extraordinary. From the ability to click bots, to click frauds, to stacking. There's an extraordinary industry within this industry designed to ensure that one party isn't abusing the other. So to say that this industry can self-regulate itself when it comes to consumers, unquestionable. In fact, it's unfortunate that the folks from SourcePoint aren't here, but
just arrived.
I'm sorry, they're coming?
Just arrived, yeah.
They're just arrived. Excellent. So we'll wait with that. Fantastic. sort of the first chapter of ad blocking, as Ben mentioned. Right now on desktop, and now it's moving towards mobile. And that's really chapter 2. Can we actually flip twice? And all right. Excellent. Now, why is ad blocking on mobile a must? Well, the form factor, right? This thing becomes the fact that these devices have small screens, whether this or a tablet. When advertising becomes abusive and intrusive, it makes it even harder to use. If anybody has kids here, they know how aggravating it is for them to click by something on accident and then jump off to the App Store or Play Store, and it's just annoying. So ads are much more disruptive to the user experience because of the mobile form factor, and tracking has become much more personal, right? If these things know where we are all the time, that's concerning. In fact, everybody here has their phone sort of shut off, right? It's in their bag or in their pocket. But these things are transmitting data. They know exactly where we're all at and that we are all here together. AdTech is not stopped for this conversation. It's happening right now, even if you're not browsing. Next slide, please. So why hasn't mobile ad blocking exploded? The reason is quite simple, and this is why we Shine have chosen the carrier route. So basically, it's Apple and Google. When you have two companies that are controlling both the OS, meaning the ability to build software that provides proper ad blocking, and they control it, they're not going to provide you the access you require. In fact, the reason when I mentioned that Chrome provides this ability because of Mozilla, that's absolutely true. They're not obligated to do this on Android because it's absolutely theirs and there's no other alternative other than Apple, which has the same type of stringent control over their OS. If that wasn't bad enough, they also control the distribution mechanisms, the App Store and Google Play. So anybody who is developing or is trying to develop a business of ad blocking and distribute an app will find that it's dead on arrival. Next, please. Which is how we find ourselves with two major game changers this year. First of all, carriers enter the game, and I'll mention this in the next slide. That's where we come in, Shine. And of course, Apple has decided to roll out ad blocking, at least the beginning of ad blocking, into iOS 9. Next slide, please. Google is even second guessing, believe it or not. Larry Page said that the industry has to do a better job because ad blocking is likely not going to go away. So it's good that they've acknowledged it. Next slide, please. So why carriers? And this is really the final slide for us. So there's a couple of reasons. First of all, carriers, when we sit with them, they actually want to find consumer champion strategies, and they believe that this is something that is extremely relevant to their businesses. If 28% of your customers are using the service at home, desktop ad blocking, it would be crazy not to think about bringing it to your subscribers on mobile. So this is not a minor service that is not finding a home. This isn't a 0.01 conversion issue. And also, which explains why it's sushi, if anybody got the subtext, only carriers can roll out ad blocking at scale. If you can't control the OS and you can't control the distribution mechanism, then the only party that can really successfully bring ad blocking to mass users, to mass consumers on a global level are carriers. And the only way to do that is not by distributing an app, but by working with a company called Shine, or like Shine, which integrates this technology at the data center level, okay? And that's something that's exceptionally difficult to stop. And that's about it. Thank you. I apologize if that ran a couple minutes.
No problem, Roy. Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break for coffee now. We'll be back in about 5 or 10 minutes, at which point we'll hear from Matt Atkinson from SourcePoint, who's just arrived. And then after that, we'll get straight into the debate. So we'll join you all back online. Obviously, this is a live feed, so I'm talking to you guys out there on Twitter, etc. We'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, so a slight change to the schedule. We're going to go into the debate when we get coffee, but Matt Atkinson has now joined us. He had some malfunction with his clock in the hotel room, which is an hour behind. So we're here now. Matt's going to do his presentation, and then we'll go straight into the debate afterwards. To everybody out there on Twitter, thank you for watching, and we'll commence now. Thanks very much. Here you go, Matt.
Thanks, Alexander. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. Again, apologies for being a little late. I wanted to,
Okay, now the people in the back can hear me. I wanted to talk a little bit today about why we at SourcePoint are approaching the market that we're approaching and how we see AdBlock, sort of our view on the whole, this whole industry. And so just as by way of background, my name is Matt Atkinson. I'm one of the co-founders of SourcePoint, and we started SourcePoint as a company to help publishers deal with the rise of ad blocking. So I'm sure you've heard, although I didn't see the presentations, I can sort of just presume to be familiar with them based on being in this market for a while. So we're all familiar with the growth of ad block. It's become a double-digit in terms of market penetration, very popular consumer tool, and over the last couple of years, publishers started noticing a headwind in terms of their ad delivery and monetization. And so this sort of prompted us about a year and a half ago to look into what's the solution to this potential publisher problem, and out of that we started SourcePoint. And at SourcePoint our goal is to figure out what the next generation of ad delivery online looks like. So ad block clearly makes it difficult or impossible to serve ads in the traditional way, and so we're really trying to answer the question, how do publishers monetize in the next generation of the internet? What does ad delivery look like? Rather than give you guys a presentation with facts and figures on ad blocking and the rate of ad blocking, or jump into a technical discussion about how to beat ad block or whether we should beat ad block, I wanted to give you my own personal reflection on why I'm interested in this at all, and in particular why I take the side that we take where we're more pro-publisher and we want to sort of help the ecosystem out. And so I call this sort of the unintended consequences if ad block grew to become, you could imagine, 50 or 60 or 70% of all users, and the attitude became there really should be no ads on the web, what would happen? And what would be the unintended consequences of that? Next slide, please. So I was 11 years old when I got on the internet. My dad came home one day and brought me a CD drive. I don't know if any of you lived in America, but in the mid-90s, AOL sent about 10 of these things to every household in the United States. So we got one, put it in the computer, and I signed online, and this was my introduction to the internet. And the internet, to an 11-year-old especially, who wasn't allowed to do many things outside, was this wonderful resource where I could get out and explore and chat with people and meet people and explore new things. And this was pretty much what I saw every day when I came home from school, along with the dial-up sound of like, I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but this was very much my childhood.
I know it by heart.
What's that?
I know the tune by heart.
Sometimes I dream about the tune still, and this was back on a 12 kilobit or kilobaud modem, so it was very, very slow, and sometimes it would take hours to connect, but it was very exciting when you did get connected. Next slide, please. AOL, despite being an amazing introduction to the internet for most of the people in the United States, in hindsight was still quite limited. So back then, AOL did not provide access to websites in the way that we think of websites today. They were very much a walled garden. So for instance, if you wanted to learn about music, you would go to AOL keyword music. And if you wanted to look up some condition you thought you had, you would go to AOL keyword health. And I remember the Super Bowl ads in the mid-90s were all about AOL keyword X or AOL keyword Y, and that's very much how content creators staked out a place on the internet and very much how they advertise to consumers, since such an overwhelming percentage of users in the United States at least were on AOL. Next slide, please. Probably around 1997, my favorite online game, which I had started playing on AOL, migrated off of AOL due to some economic reasons and went onto the internet. And so I had to follow it since I was fairly addicted to that game. And this introduced me to the actual internet, web browsers and Yahoo and domain names and everything that goes along with what we think of as the web today. And this was, to a then 16-year-old, sort of a mind-blowing expansion of the web, to go from AOL, which was a very controlled experience, to the broader internet, which was this incredibly diverse, by comparison, uncontrolled ecosystem. And that was just when all of the .com sites were starting to get going in the early .com boom. You had Yahoo, you had WebMD, you had a whole slate of sites, most of which no longer exist, but the next generation of them do. Next slide. So from 97, 98, all the way through today, you had all of these sites exploding because users were moving away from AOL, and for the first time they were being dumped on the web. And whether it was via search or discovery on Yahoo, or then shortly afterwards Google, or just by browsing, they were experiencing the discovery of all these different websites, the .coms, the .nets, the .orgs, from the walled garden of AOL, this very diverse ecosystem of TLDs sprung up. To support this ecosystem, because people had to make money in order to pay for content creation and hosting and distribution, we have the very complicated Lumascape here for display, for instance, of ad tech companies which sprung up. So from the early 2000s all the way through today, ad tech has been this sort of bowl of spaghetti of all different companies trying to support publishers and help them monetize. Next slide, please. So then along comes AdBlock. AdBlock exploits a very obvious flaw in the growth of the ad tech ecosystem, which is the reliance on third-party JavaScript. So if I go to the New York Times today, almost all tracking and customization and advertising is done through a layer of very transparent third-party JavaScript. And so for AdBlock, circa 8, 9 years ago, it was very easy to sit in the connection and say, I'm going to disallow any advertising, any tracking connections that want to exist. And AdBlock over time has gotten more sophisticated. So you now have AdBlock clients that operate on the operating system level. I believe Shine talked about potentially embedding it in the data center. And in all cases, you're talking about really just a managed firewall or a regex that operates on the page. And so by exploiting the characteristic of ad tech that relies upon transparency, meaning you can see which calls are being made in real time, you can block those calls and you can effectively eliminate advertising. So, you know, again, rather than delve too deeply into that, what struck us about a year ago was this interesting question: what happens if AdBlock goes to 100%, meaning you deploy it literally in the data centers of all ISPs and carriers, or it comes bundled in with such a broad range of PC software that if you download any antivirus client or system optimizer, you would effectively become an AdBlock user as well, because it was bundled into those products. And the position that we arrived at after wargaming this back and forth as a thought exercise was that you can eliminate advertising from 99% of sites, but not 100% of sites. And so by exploiting the third-party ad tech ecosystem, you can get rid of ads on almost every site that you would visit. But in cases where companies are totally vertically integrated, like a Facebook or a Google or an Apple, where they have all of the behavioral data, all of the audience data, all of the sales, ad serving, and content serving within one infrastructure, it's effectively impossible to remove ads. And you can do it today because those companies haven't fought back yet. But at the end of the day, they have the engineering resources and the technical capability to scramble everything together such that an ad content is completely unrecognizable, and they can serve it from a single point and source. So what happens when you eliminate ads from 99% of sites, but not 1% of sites? Next slide, please. To our way of thinking, you devolve the internet back to 1995, a collection of walled gardens reminiscent of AOL. Next slide, please. And so you kind of take the position that people will always go online to consume content, and that organizations like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and other premium publishers will always be creating content. It really becomes a question of where are people going to go in order to consume that content? Where are publishers going to drive readers to consume that content? And if, as a thought exercise, you imagine that the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal is no longer able to serve ads on their own site, what's being built behind the scenes is a next generation internet which allows those publishers to push their content into this very select group of first-party walled gardens, where these companies will monetize for them and revenue share back to them. So for instance, Apple with iOS 9 announces its News app. Very clearly they want more content to be pushed into the app. They want more readers to go into the app and consume news instead of going to the web. Facebook, with its instant articles feature, has roughly the same motivations. They want users to stay within Facebook, not only discovering the articles, but also consuming the articles within Facebook. And I think in both cases, they offer to serve ads alongside the publisher's content, and then rev share some of that ad revenue back to the publisher. So in effect, to us, and this is a much deeper conversation, but in summary, to us, it's not a question of will there be ads on the internet or not, because I think quite clearly companies like Facebook and Apple and Google will always find a way to serve ads to their users. To us, it's more a question of, are we going to devolve back to a very small group of very strong walled gardens that try to captivate and control the vast majority of browsing, content creation, and content consumption? Or are we going to create some new, potentially different, but nonetheless healthy way for a third-party ad ecosystem to survive, and in surviving, allow publishers to survive as well, and allow the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the hundreds and thousands of other publishers out there creating content to be able to have a direct connection with their audience and to make it economically feasible for them to have their audience connect with them on their own domains, on their own apps, on their own platforms that they can control, which we think is a much healthier way for the internet to evolve.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so we're going to start the debate now, and I'm going to take the priority here as the chair of this session. I'm going to start with my questions first. So I've listened to all of the presentations. I'm going to address Ben first. I'm going to address each person in the order that they gave their presentations. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to run this session was because there's a great deal of misinformation out there regarding ad blocking. There's no way we can rely on the press and media to give an objective viewpoint because they have a vested interest. So I felt it was important that we had a forum where all stakeholders could be involved and we could have an objective discussion about it. So on that basis, I'm going to start with my questions to Ben Williams from IO, who are the company behind AdBlock Plus. Now, there's been a great deal of publicity around your company over the past 8 to 12 months because of the lawsuits that you're currently facing. There's also been a great deal of misinformation out there in the press regarding your acceptable ads program, and it's misinformation that I fell foul to myself in an article I wrote back in December. I'm quite happy to admit that. Now, the acceptable ads program, as far as I'm aware, around 90% of the publishers who are using it don't pay anything. All the press reports that I see out there always seem to indicate, or at least hint, that companies can bypass the criteria which is community assessed by simply paying you money. And I understand this isn't true. So can you quickly explain to me and everybody else who's watching, who's here at the session and online, how the acceptable ads program works?
Yeah, so that's a key misrepresentation of acceptable ads that's happened from day one. Basically, 90% of the people on the whitelist don't pay, and the criteria are the same for everyone. We could do this because we really cared about it. If you don't believe that we care about our users, then you could just look at the fact that there are other open source free ad blockers out there that people could go to if they didn't like us. But basically, the acceptable ads is about criteria, making criteria for better ads. It's about compromise. Because all too often, the solutions that you hear about from people in this sphere are basically just one way to get either ahead of one person or to get ahead of users and to obfuscate the will of users or to, like I said, get ahead of somebody else in the game. What we think about our compromise is that it's the best way to move forward in the world that we live in right now, because it allows everyone to basically get what they want. Everyone wins in this. Users can turn it off if they don't like it, but we found that most people don't turn it off. The opt-out rate's like under 10%, far under 10%, and publishers are coming to us all the time, and advertisers to get their ads whitelisted. So, what I mentioned in the presentation was that we think we stumbled upon a way to go forward, an optimistic way to go forward, not a pessimistic way to go forward. Something where we could imagine a tomorrow where we can all perhaps live together, as opposed to one in which one of us wins. And that's the issue with a lot of the solutions that are being peddled out there right now.
Okay, so turn yours off. Okay, so it seems to me that it's a very responsible way of moving forward. You're giving publishers the opportunities to still monetize their content in a way that's acceptable to the AdBlock community, which consists of, I believe, around 75 million users, if my numbers are correct. The program is community driven, so it's very democratic. The criteria was decided by the community. So I find it odd that companies would sue you for giving them the opportunity to reach a market of somewhere in the region of 7 to 9% that they never previously had any access to because they were blocking all the ads prior to that. But they would sue you when they're given the opportunity to make money in a way that's acceptable to the online community. I find that really quite strange and a little hypocritical, really. We have a saying in England, cutting the nose off to spite the face. It doesn't make sense to me, but to be explicitly clear here, because a number of news articles and press articles I've read have stated, for example, Financial Times, have stated that Google or Facebook can bypass the criteria of AdBlock simply by paying you money, and this isn't true, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So for the record, you cannot bypass the criteria with a bag full of money. You basically have to abide by the same criteria as everybody. If you don't believe me, go into our forum and find any ad that we whitelisted and look at it for yourself. You can also see in our forum times where we whitelisted someone and our community decided that the ads that we whitelisted basically weren't acceptable anymore, and we've actually gone back and changed those. And again, if you still don't believe me, we would do this out of self-interest if we weren't doing it because we want to keep our users. Because basically, again, our users could go on to the next ad blocker out there, which is also completely free, and use that.
Okay, thanks for that, Ben. Okay, now back to Criteo. We have Plaise Vignon here from Criteo. Now, I'm a privacy guy. I'm very well known here in Brussels. They refer to me as the cookie monster.
Yeah, I noticed that.
For my work on 5.3 and my advocacy work with regards to online behavioural advertising. I had a meeting with the European Commission back in March talking about AdBlocking, and I won't mention the name of the person who I met with because he's since moved on from the department he was in, but to quote him, and this was a meeting on record, as far as the European Commission is concerned, the advertising industry are in breach of Article 5.3. They are not compliant with Article 5.3 currently with regards to notice and consent. And as such, they fully support any tool which empowers users to take more control over their privacy in an enforcement vacuum that we currently have across data protection authorities in Europe in lieu of the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, you gave your presentation earlier, you made several points with regards to the fact that you don't collect personally identifiable information, etc., etc. Article 29 Working Party have defined quite clearly that any information which allows you to single out an individual from a group is identifying information, okay, personally identifying information. So whether you or not you collect their name or their phone number or their medical data, etc., if you have access to data which can single them out from a group, then you are able to identify them. By having pseudonymous identifiers such as unique identifier numbers in cookies, etc., is in fact a form of identification. And indeed, IP addresses, as determined by the European Court of Justice in a number of cases, for example Scarlett versus Saban, it's been determined by the European Court of Justice that IP address is indeed identifiable information, personally identifying information. So from a purely privacy perspective, I've been recommending people use ad blockers for a number of years. But the purpose of this event isn't just to get my opinion out there. I want to hear everybody's opinion. You gave your presentation earlier. We've just heard back from Ben now that there is a solution available for publishers which allows them to provide advertising in a way which is acceptable to the community. Now the community have explicitly made a statement by downloading an ad blocker and installing it on their machine. As I said in my introduction, this is a facilitation of Recital 66 as far as I'm concerned, and as far as all the politicians and legislators I've spoken to. So why are the publishing industry not getting on board with this very explicit choice by users? to give them the opportunity to serve ads and increase their revenues as a result.
That was one question. Should I rephrase it as why isn't the advertising industry okay with AdBlocking?
Well, ad blocking is going to happen anyway. People always find ways of ad blocking, whether they're using an ad blocking tool in their browser or not. I, for example, run my own DNS servers, and I have a whitelist and a blacklist of domains for the advertising industry to block them at the network level. It saves my network bandwidth, it makes my network run faster, and protects my privacy and security. But we're seeing a solution here by AdBlock called the Acceptable Ads Program, which allows publishers.
By AdBlock Plus.
Yeah, by AdBlock Plus, which allows
not by AdBlock.
Which allows publishers to be able to present advertising which has been deemed as acceptable and meets the criteria that's been democratically determined by the community of around 75 million users, of which I understand 45 million are in Europe. So why are we seeing the industry suing the developers of these tools instead of getting on board and trying to reach a consensus where everybody's happy?
Okay, that was a long question. There are many things in your question. I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot talk specifically to every test of laws. Crypto believe is in compliance with the law, obviously. We don't collect IP address, to go back to one of your points.
But you do collect identifying information. You can
we have third-party cookies.
Yeah, and you have a UID in those cookies.
Yeah.
So
it's a third-party cookie that is that the user consents to.
Well, they don't consent to it.
Can I speak, please?
When do they consent to it?
Typically, when a user goes to an advertiser website, they get a cookie consent.
Well, every time I've seen these banners, they don't ask for consent. If you don't consent, then the cookies are still placed.
Well, you have an interpretation of the law, which is, I guess, not the same.
Okay, well, anyway, go ahead.
We believe the user consents. We also believe ad blocking is an expression of user will at some point. Now, whether AdBlock Plus is proposing an industry-wide solution, AdBlock Plus is proposing a solution that works for AdBlock Plus, which is a fair chunk of AdBlocking, but it's not the entire industry. What we're talking about, and you mentioned it was a joke, but I can disagree with you, is a more responsible ad industry, implementing best practices.
What do you mean it is a joke?
Well, your phrase was the industry self-regulating is a joke.
Yes.
And I disagree with that phrase. And the reason you said it was a joke is because you're saying adverts kind of go against self-regulation, and we think the industry should implement the best practices of advertising, and not the worst practices that are implemented by some actors. Whether ad blocking is definitely a reaction to the worst practices of the industry, and we think the common ground that Ben is referring to can be reached around the best practices of the industry.
So I'll ask you one more question. So do you, at Criteria, support the explicit consumer choice to block ads by installing tools which facilitate their rights under Recital 66?
We don't do anything to convert it.
Okay, thank you very much. Roi from Shine, you gave a very interesting presentation. I found it fascinating. Some of your sound bites I think were very good. We need to have a discussion after this session because I think there's a number of things we can talk about. You seem quite aggressive towards the advertising industry, which is a stance I've taken myself, so I can appreciate that. Your technology works at the network level. Now, as a privacy guy, I made my initial work in privacy battling deep packet inspection at the network level, and this was for advertising purposes with a company called Form, who were using deep packet inspection to profile users' activity online. And there were a number of legal concerns in Europe as a result of that. For example, the technology isn't compliant under European law without consent from both sides of the communication. Now, I spoke to your CEO recently, and you're here today, so I'm going to ask you personally. I know that your system doesn't use whitelisting. That's what the information I've been given so far. So how does your technology work at the network level to be able to block these adverts? Is it using a deep packet inspection or a proxy type system, or is it using some other sort of technology?
Okay, so there is, I'm not going to dive into exactly how we do things, but yes, there is DPI. What I will say is this. If you remember in the history of Shine, we were founded as an antivirus company. The skill that we have, our DNA in being able to find malware, viruses, allows us necessary for antivirus companies to battle folks that are trying to monetize or abuse consumers on a malware level to do the same thing. This is a fire against fire fight. This is, this will probably not be a fight that will ever end either. If one side thinks it's done, it's not. Our job will never be done. Our technology exists. It's very sophisticated. It has researchers, human beings. It has artificial intelligence. It's quite a sophisticated system. But there are very smart people on the other side. If you remember, as I said, the best minds of Silicon Valley are developing AdTech, and they're pretty smart. They're not going to give up tomorrow morning and just go work for Uber. So, at least not all of them. So we're going to keep up the fight as well, and that's, I hope, answers the question.
Okay, so how do you propose to overcome the legislative hurdles with regards to consent mechanisms required in order to use deep packet inspection, which involves the interception of communications at the network level? How do you intend to be able to meet those requirements? Because you may be able to get the requirements of the users, but I don't understand how you would receive the consent from publishers, because obviously they're going to be anti this technology and they're unlikely to give their consent. So how do you intend to overcome that issue here in Europe? And also in the US, it would be an issue in the US as well. There may be some regions in the world where it isn't, but certainly in the developed world, in my experience in this field, the interception of communications system, which is very heavily regulated. How do you propose to overcome that with your technology?
Yeah, I think you're slightly overestimating the sensitivity of this, because we're actually this type of technology. And there's DPI happening all of the time in various carriers for various reasons. Most of them obviously not to intercept communication on the personal level for consumers, but for other reasons. But two things. First of all, as you said, this is not just the developed world or Europe or the US. This is a global phenomenon. There are consumers dissatisfied with advertising everywhere. Shine is not working with only European carriers. We're working with carriers around the world. That's the first thing. Secondly, as Blaise said, he's not a lawyer. Well, neither am I. However, AdTech, as you remember, as it was stated in my presentation, is malware with a legal team. No side will be able to knock out the other fairly easily. Every carrier that we work with obviously has a legal team, and they are reviewing these issues immediately as we begin speaking with them. If this was a critical issue, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are today.
Okay, it would be interesting to see how your technology moves forward and makes it into the marketplace. I'm going to rush on because we're getting short on time and when everybody else have a chance. I just want to quickly talk to Matt Atkinson here from SourcePoint. Matt, I liked your history lesson. I too joined the internet in 1991, before the web even existed. I've been involved in internet technologies my entire adult life. I'm an incredibly passionate technologist. I worked in technology for 20 years before I moved into sociology and privacy advocacy. So I've been through everything that you said on your presentation, and it's something I take to heart. However, I don't think we're going back there. I think the problem we have with the advertising industry, and I'm going to make a couple of references here. I gave a speech at a presentation at the European Economic and Social Fund back in Social Committee back in 2010, I believe it was, here in Brussels, looking at advertising to children. And it wasn't my presentation I want to mention here, it was a presentation by a university who were looking at the cost-benefit analysis of advertising. Now, the argument I've heard for the past 8 years in all the debates and consultations I've been involved with the advertising sector and various political and legislative bodies, the argument always comes back that they make $151 billion or $5 billion or $40 billion. You know, we can't regulate advertising because of the impact it will have on the economy. But what was interesting about this research back then, in 2010, was the deficit that advertising places on the economy. The cost of healthcare, for example, from people who become obese or have coronary disease or other issues as a result of leading unhealthy lifestyles, which is pushed onto them by this marketing world, is phenomenal. It far outstrips the entire revenues of advertising in Europe. We had some research come out of a Canadian university just this week, looking at ad blocking on their network over a 6-week period, they save 25 to 40% of their bandwidth costs. So you have the direct savings there as well. And also you have the fundamental rights issues, the privacy. The advertising industry is not well behaved, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it is. It isn't. Self-regulation, as Roi has said, has been largely a joke. The do not track process has been stalled and is only now reaching final call, and even that isn't satisfactory as a direct result of the advertising industry wanting to maintain the status quo. Self-regulation has been proved over and over and over again not to work. So why should we have any sympathy towards this industry? They fought through Cycle 66 because they wanted to maintain the status quo. Ad blocking tools are an explicit facilitation of Recycle 66, which allows users to display and illustrate that they do not consent to this model. So why would you want to go against that with your technologies and go against that explicit user choice?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of meat on that plate. First, I would just reference back to the presentation and say, listen, if we think that we're ever going to build a future without advertising, we're dreaming, all of us. Whether it's Facebook, Google, and Apple building these walled gardens within which they still can advertise McDonald's and Philip Morris cigarettes and all of the other, which I agree with you, there's a lot of negative advertising out there, there's a lot of malvertising, there's a lot of fraud, there are a lot of elements in the advertising ecosystem that exist that should not exist. But envisioning a future without advertising as the solution to that, I think, is just naive. Those are huge companies. They're always going to find a way to advertise to us. Even in the dystopian future where you imagine somehow no banner ad ever exists, advertising is built into the human consciousness in a way that if people were not able to monetize content through any third-party advertising ecosystem, my sense is you give birth to a generation of native advertiser content creators. So instead of somebody writing a blog about weight loss because they wanted to write a blog about weight loss, you have some affiliate marketer who's pushing a new diet pill scam who has the financial resources to fund this content creation. So I think today there's a lot of room for improvement in the ad tech ecosystem, and there's a lot of common ground around wanting ads to become better, wanting to remove fraud and malvertising from the ecosystem. It's really a question of how best do we do that. I think there's a minority of people who argue there is a future without any type of advertising out there, and I think that's naive. I'll give you one quick example. I think just to reference the whitelist that AdBlock Plus runs, the whitelist is really not a solution in our mind. For example, Google is whitelisted for search ads. Google is, just by virtue of being one of the largest ad servers in the world, also one of the largest delivery channels for bad advertising, the kind of advertising you mentioned. One of the largest delivery channels for malware and spyware and adware. So it does no good to whitelist all Google search ads. If you go to Google and search for Firefox, most of the download links on that page will lead you to bundles which give you a toolbar and an ad injector of some kind. In the Shine case, I'd say, at least in the US, do we really want the carriers to be deciding who can get access to us and who can't? I mean, the carriers are held in lower esteem even than probably Microsoft was at the lowest point in its PR history. They are not trusted parties.
Just a second. Can I just get back to my point? Well,
Sure.
My explicit question was, if users make an explicit choice, download a tool which is facilitating their rights under European law, why do you feel that your technology has a right to go against that?
Well, I think the users, so there's, again, nuances to this. I think that our view is the majority of AdBlock users actually don't know they even have AdBlock installed, let alone that they might be opting into a whitelist.
Well, they have to explicitly and manually install it. So how do they not know it's installed?
No, so in a lot of cases, what we now see is software rolling out with AdBlock auto-enabled as a feature. So for example, 3 months ago, a registry cleaner called Yet Another Cleaner with about 3 million global users auto-updated to include AdBlock functionality as part of their core suite. And why not? It's free, it saves bandwidth, it speeds up the browsing activity. In China, the 3 most popular browsers now come with AdBlock installed by default. So not only do the users not seek it out, in many cases they don't even know they have it installed.
But China's not Europe. In Europe we have an explicit law, a directive, the e-privacy directive. Article 5.3 of the e-privacy directive tackles the issue of accessing and storing information on an end user's terminal equipment for the purpose of tracking. That includes cookies. Recital 66, which is the preamble for that particular clause within the directive, states that browser tools and browser choices can be used as a consent mechanism. People in Europe who are using Firefox or Chrome, they don't have AdBlock installed by default. They have to manually go out, download it, install it, configure it, and let it run. So they're making an explicit choice. So again, my question is, and we have to be quick because we're running low on time, my question is, if they make an explicit choice as specified in our law here in Europe, why do you think that your company has the right to go against that choice by circumventing it?
Well, I'd say from a practical perspective, if a user nukes all their cookies and scrambles their fingerprint, they're effectively worth very little to the ad ecosystem anyway. I'd say users have the right to try to block ads. Publishers, at the end of the day, have the right to try to serve an ad, right? It's sort of the bit that leaves the server. I take a very pragmatic view of it. The bits that leave the server are up to the publisher, and the bits that that hit the computer are up to the user. At the end of the day, if the user isn't happy with the experience they're getting from a publisher site, they can choose not to visit the publisher site. I think it's on the publishers to be totally transparent about what they're doing and why they're doing it. But at the end of the day, the most powerful statement a user can make is simply not to visit a publisher site. And if enough users do that, then the publishers will get the message and either change their business model or not, or they'll cater to a smaller audience.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to give each of you a chance now to ask each other questions. Again, we'll start in order. So we'll start with Ben, we'll go to Plaise, then we'll go to Roi, and then we'll go back to you. We need to try and hurry it up if we can. So, Ben, do you have any questions for any of the other panelists?
There we go. Probably a lot, but since we were just talking about it, so if I get it correctly, what SourcePoint is trying to do is to try and force users to basically stop visiting publisher sites, because that would be the logical outcome of what you just said.
Well, I think we have many goals. The most ambitious of which is just, like all of us up here, trying to figure out what the next generation of monetization on the web looks like. Hopefully one that supports an independent third-party publisher ecosystem. But in terms of what we would give publishers, that's one of the options. I think many users are unaware that there's a value exchange occurring when they visit a publisher site. When I go to the New York Times to read news, that site is only available to me because of advertising I consume. Right? Without advertising, they can't afford to keep that site running, and maybe their content is still created and pushed to Facebook and monetized there. Maybe for smaller sites, it's not created anymore at all. So one of the options is to educate consumers and say, listen, this is the trade that's occurring. If you're very uncomfortable with seeing ads, or you want us to take some other action that means we can make no money off of you, then there are other options available to help you compensate us, like a subscription, a paywall, some other exchange of value. So I think, yeah.
That's an educational way of doing it, but the problem is when I go to Wired, for instance, right now, you see a notification that says, do us a solid and turn off your ad blocker. Totally fine with that. I think you're right in the fact that people don't always understand this implicit exchange of value. That's true. But there's a difference between doing it in an educational way and asking users, and then doing it in a way that's patently anti-user. There's a big difference there, I think, and that's the problem I would have.
Well, I don't think any amount of education is necessarily anti-user. I guess the most anti-user outcome would be for Wired to no longer be able to fund their operations and have to shut down. Right? And then the users don't have that content that they wanted. So I guess I'd see an attempt to educate the users as to what's necessary to keep the lights on at a site that they're frequenting, at least pro-user in some sense.
Next. Anybody else? Do you have any other questions?
Probably a lot, but
Yeah,
how do we end in here?
We have to be quick. So. Any pertinent ones?
No. Let's just go on to the next person.
Okay, after you. Oh, you have to turn yours off. The mics are in front. That's right.
yeah, no more than two people talking with each other at the same time, right? I guess we've been talking about this kind of dichotomy of ad blockers as a privacy tool, which is what the view you're pushing, and ad blocker as a user experience tool, which is more like the view that Ben is pushing. Ad blocking lists are broadly divided into two lists, easy list and privacy list. It's my understanding from discussion with ad blocking folks that most people turn on privacy list, easy list and turn off privacy list. Is that correct?
Sorry, turn off easy list and
Turn on easy list, so they do block ads, but they don't turn on privacy list, which blocks cookies.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. Most people, easy list is the standard blocking list just because it's the best maintained list out there. So most people just go with easy list. I mean, again, I guess the point you're trying to make is that it's not really about privacy; it's about something else.
That's been my point.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Could be. I don't know, but I think there's an interesting point there that maybe most people don't know what's going on their screens either. They don't know that there are a lot of tracking pixels when they visit certain sites. And so if they knew, they'd be creeped out, and maybe they'd also do that. But no, yeah, of course.
Just make a quick comment here as well, yeah. Certainly my experience as an advocate, the response I've had from the general public is when they find out that this type of activity is going on, it does creep them out. And it's important to note as well that even if people don't enable the privacy list, the easy list would block those cookies simply by blocking those ads in the first place.
That's not entirely correct.
Well, if the connection to the server that's serving the ads never happens, the cookie can never be placed.
Yeah, that's not entirely correct. Again, we can take this offline.
Well, technically it is. But you have to connect to the service to get the cookie.
Well, it's
There's
not,
no way to get
it's not the same server, some lists.
Anyway,
It's not, you should.
do you have any other questions?
No, I'm fine. It's okay.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Wow. So, Matt, to you. So, for those of you who don't know, I wrote a rather scathing opinion about SourcePoint on Advertising Age, saying that there's really little more evil than being anti-consumer. Here's this thing, right? There's a number of things that you said. So first of all, Alex, you said 91. So I was born into a family where my father's been using email since 1980. So I've actually seen the technology industry kind of evolve okay without advertising. So to say that this impairs innovation, call me a little skeptical. Yes, I'm a little skeptical about that. But a quick little anecdote. I was invested in a company that developed anti-frustration software. It basically helped people handle some problems with their PCs that were fairly aggravating. One of these things, unsurprisingly, the stuff that AdWord does, like toolbars and stuff like that, changes your search bars and things of that sort. And it was a very successful company. We sold it, very, very happy about that, and made a little change. Excellent. So here's this thing. I think you said you're very pragmatic, and I think you are. I think you've also made a career of reviews to consumers. I think you're very pragmatic to say that consumers don't know when they're opting into ad blocking. I think that's nonsense. Because I think you use that excuse to say that users have opted into your adware in open install, and then that you were purely A-okay with whatever you push down their throat. Okay? So I think you are very pragmatic. You just want to make money. And so do we. I am not a philanthropist. However, there's a way to make money, and the advertising industry, and no disrespect, but your career has proven this, is unscrupulous in its manner. So I should ask a question. So here's the question. In this company that I was invested in, Saludo, we figured out that people were using a lot of their time and paying technicians to figure out how to remove this crap. Malware, adware. Sorry, it's like, yeah, just about that. It's actually called thatware too, in fact. So you guys sold Open Install, right, to AVG, ironic, for like 5 million, 5.6, I believe, 5 and change. So my question is this: do you think consumers worldwide invested more than $5.6 million worth in work hours and in consulting and in technicians to remove your adware off their PCs? Was that sale a net positive for the world?
Well, first I'll say it sounds like we've had a similar experience and worked in some of the same markets.
No,
And-
I worked on the other side.
Well, I'll say this then, I share a lot of
I'm
your,
making a career of helping consumers.
I share a lot of your frustrations with the download industry. I think if we had been willing to be AdWare at open install, we would have sold for more than $5 million. Unfortunately, there was a line in the industry which we were not willing to cross, which InstallCore, I'm sure you're familiar with, was willing to cross. And I think that's why today they're worth 800 million and why we were sold for 5. So in the download industry,
The fact that there are more evil companies than you is not really the issue. You crossed the line, you were just uncomfortable crossing a further line.
well, we can get into what
And
open
that's, and that's really the nature of anti-AdBlocking.
I'd say if you think that a publicly listed security company would acquire an evil startup,
Yes, they wouldn't be, you weren't the first company.
probably unfamiliar with
Yes.
corporate M&A, but I'd say,
AVG has made,
One second,
several
can we
M&As.
calm it down a little bit?
Yeah.
Take out the evil and try and have a civil debate here.
yeah, so to be clear, Open Install bundled a toolbar, which became the AVG toolbar, in with downloads of the AVG product, which was a behavior that AVG and many other software companies did prior to Open Install. We created some cloud-based installation software that made it a little easier and a little cheaper to do that. The AVG toolbar, I don't think, absolutely is not a piece of adware. You can debate whether you would want it on your own computer or not, but it, to my mind, is a perfectly legitimate piece of software that added value to the consumers who wanted it.
Would you want it on your mom's computer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
She has it. She's very proud. She
Did
has
she
it.
choose to install it? Or would she do it by installing another piece of software?
Well, to get to your larger point, I think, which is a good one about the power of default, when a user downloads a piece of software, they don't always know everything they're getting, even if everything is properly disclosed. And that speaks to the power of default that platforms have. Apple has that, Facebook has that, AVG has that. When you install their software, you trust the AVG brand. You can read the disclosure screens and find out exactly what you're getting and customize it or not. It's up to you as the consumer. There are a number of companies who don't disclose what they bundle. Those companies, I agree, should be defined as evil, and I'm sure you know who they are, and I know who they are, and they know who they are. But to your point's relevance to the panel today, a lot of consumers are now downloading software which includes ad blocking functionality, which they don't know is included. Even in Europe, Alexander, to your point, you know, we launched with a video client in Europe where before a user with AdBlock could watch the video, we prompted them with a message that said they had to disable the AdBlock. Overnight, their #1 customer service complaint became, I'm seeing this message, I don't know what AdBlock is, help me. And it's clear that just like Yet Another Cleaner and Maxthon and Q360 have incorporated ad blocking functionality into their products as a strategic differentiator, more software companies will continue to do that over time. And more consumers will have ad block on their PCs without even knowing what it is, let alone the nuances of whether they're opted into one list or another list.
I think that's a lot of pretty words, and there's always the words legal criteria and all these wonderful. Look, it's quite simple, okay? It's quite simple, and I'll simplify because it's not legalese. You are either pro-consumer or anti-consumer. It's very simple, and the bulk of the ad tech industry has been anti-consumer. That is why there is ad blocking, why people are downloading in droves. It's not a difficult proposition to grasp.
So I'd contrast the New York Times wanting to advertise to its users, which you would call anti-consumer,
No.
to what I assume your business model is, which is in a year, Verizon will be by default billing every user $5 a month extra for ad block software, which is applied to them either at the data center level or on their device. How is that any different than what you've accused us of doing in our past, not even the company we have today? And how is that any more pro-consumer or
We need to
anti-consumer?
stop this here now. I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. We literally have just a couple of minutes left. So anybody from the audience wants to ask anybody from the panel? Your name please?
Hello, my name is Thorsten Kleins. I'm a journalist. I have a question for Roy. You said you want to earn money. How? You basically say we have a technique that makes users use carriers less, and where's the money in that? And in fact, carriers in USA and my carrier use a lot of advertising techniques to address me. So it's not, I don't see the point that the carriers have any interest to be pro-consumer anti-ad tech.
Okay, try and keep your answers brief, please.
I think somebody has to shut one of the mics. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So I can't answer all of your a couple of questions there because I'm not a carrier, hence I can't speak to their strategy. But if you ask how we Shine make money, it's quite simple. There is a problem, and we provide a solution. We have investors, and a lot of money has been invested in the development of this technology. There's salaries. There's a lot of Nespresso that we drink, and we're not a philanthropic organization. It takes quite a bit of effort to clean the damage that ad tech abuses with which ad tech abuses consumers. It takes money, it takes time, and it takes resources. So much like you were paying a carrier for or an ISP for antivirus because there are viruses and you're paying for their removal, it's in the same way. There's a problem, and we're providing a solution. I can assure you, if there wasn't a problem, we wouldn't be in this business because there wasn't revenue in it. Unfortunately, cleaning this mess costs money. And so, yeah, that's how we make money.
And who pays?
I'm sorry?
Who pays?
Who pays? The carrier pays us, of course. I mean, we sell them the product and they choose to monetize it in whichever way. By the way, some are thinking about offering it for free, some for pay, some will reduce from a couple of dollars or euros from the subscription, the monthly subscription. So there's a variety of ways to monetize. We get compensated, of course, for the service that we provide, of course.
Okay, Roi, thank you. Anybody else? No? Well, thank you very much everybody who's attended. Thank you everybody who's watched the live stream and everybody who will be watching the recorded video once that goes up as well. It's been a very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much time as we would have liked. Maybe we can revisit this at some point after the summer. If that happens, I'll make sure that we get notice out very much clearly in advance this time, and maybe we can continue the discussion at another time. Thank you very much to Joseph and his team for sponsoring the event and providing us this wonderful facility here at the European Parliament in Brussels. And thank you to all of my panelists who've come a very long way in many cases to come and have this debate. It's been very interesting. It was never going to be easy. So my thanks to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.